Now let's fire up the news hour. Here is the Weekend Radio team.
Welcome to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. I'm your host, Kurt Dukach. Today I have Michael McCullough, Perry Heichu, and our guest, the Mayor Pro Tem Steve Ross, in the house. So,
Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Las Vegas.
City of Las Vegas, yes, that's
Indeed.
right.
And we're happy to have you here, Steve. And let's get right into it. I know you're a native Nevadan, so I've got a couple of questions for you. Growing up north and coming down here, what did you do before you got involved in public service, and what got you interested in the political game?
Well, I'm a union electrician by trade, so I'm in construction all my life pretty much. And I met my wife at Twin Lakes Elementary School in the 3rd grade. We have 5 children.
Wow.
We have 14 grandchildren, all under the age of 8 years old, living within a mile of my house. So they all stay.
Great.
And just very fortunate to want to give back, and had an opportunity in 2004 when Michael Mack chose not to run for re-election to do so. I was planning on running for county commission the year before that, but my wife's business was growing so quickly, we were so busy, I just did not have the time. So that's kind of who I am, and the opportunity to run for that office was significant. Perfect timing, actually. I did run against 13 other people in the primary, and then a runoff in the general election, which I won handily, and have won my re-elections ever since then. I got recalled once, if you recall, which was an interesting go around. Did run for mayor against Carolyn Goodman when she jumped in the race. I was certainly far too deep to get out, but that was a good education for me. I don't regret doing that at all. Gave me an opportunity to meet some new people, and that's part of campaigning. That's part of actually being in this office or any elected office. You get to meet great people who continue and want to serve this community. You meet a few ornery ones too down the road, but for the most part, they're good people trying to do good things.
And speaking of meeting, I remember meeting you at a breakfast with the mayor up in Summerlin back in 2010, shortly after the federal raids, when we had that green summer and the dispensaries were first happening and just trying to get the laws to change. And I remember Oscar had told you that this is a constituency that is legitimate and respectable, and I found you open from the first on this, and it is an important issue to many people. And through the city council, as WCAM board members have testified over the past couple of years, as we're birthing this new industry, we've seen you be a friend to the industry. And what are your feelings on medical marijuana?
Well,
in general?
I think in general, it's interesting growing up in the time period that we grew up in, and all of a sudden now it's legalized in many states for recreational use as well. It's kind of interesting to just be here at this time in life, I guess, because it was so taboo for so many years, and it still is to a lot of people. But I did not realize the medical benefits of the cannabinoids in medical marijuana. I had no idea, and felt very much like a lot of people who were totally against it at one point, but then all of a sudden it's really helping patients. This is something that we really need to research. I mean, growing up here in Las Vegas, you're exposed to drugs and marijuana at an early age, and just by going to school here, but there is real potential for medical marijuana to make a huge difference in a lot of people's lives. Absolutely. And I really want to see that research. I really want to see that take place. I think it was Sanjay Gupta on CNN, did a show many years ago, and he was that same mindset. Oh no, it's bad. Marijuana will never be in the mainstream. And then he saw what happened to a little girl. I think it was Charlotte, and that's where the term Charlotte's Web comes from, for that strain of marijuana, and how it changed her life. And I watched that show. And
going from multiple seizures a day down
sakes.
to just a few in a week.
Well, being a parent and watching my daughter go through that, and there's nothing I can do, and the medical doctors are telling me there's nothing they can do, and then all of a sudden here comes this medical marijuana breakthrough, and it works. Cancer victims, PTSD folks that are going through the PTSD issues. I mean, all of the wondrous benefits of marijuana that we don't even know yet.
I really think that if cannabis didn't get you high, it would be considered a miracle plant in so many ways. But that euphoria that it has given rise to this stigma over the past 70 plus years, and it has just turned from a plant which has been helping people for millennia into this devil weed. And that's not because the plant changed. It's because not even societal norms, but certain people who had things to gain by prohibition twisted.
people believe what they're told to believe, and it was even more true back then when there were so fewer media sources and so fewer avenues of information. Like the information, the age of information is upon us. We have the infinite power of the internet at our hands, and back then it was much more controlled, and I'm not exactly sure how many people were even literate back then during the Great Depression and things like that. Like, those were kind of weird times when they passed all those anti-cannabis laws. So
Well, remember too, the coca plant. The coca plant used to be in Coca-Cola. I mean, it used to be in many products early on, and until the dangers of that were certainly found out, and then it was taken out of the mainstream. But I think minds are changing.
And yet it's interesting because the coca plant, cocaine, is a Schedule II drug under the federal government, meaning that doctors could prescribe it. And I recall when I was living in New York that there was a dentist who was doing cocaine nasal swabs to clean out people's noses, and that was a little strange to hear about. But the idea is that cocaine is Schedule II and allowed to be prescribed by doctors, and cannabis is still Schedule I.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. I think hopefully our president, before he leaves office, will exercise one of his executive orders and change that, because what does that say about us as a society in regards to trying to help patients with some challenging issues? We've got the medicine available. Let's use the medicine available and make these people better.
Now, reschedule it and make it researchable. I mean, because even if you're against cannabis, we need to see this research. I mean, if you believe it doesn't help, you should be for this research. Prove it. Let the science show that. You know what I mean?
I think we're going to see that even if it doesn't get the schedule change. I honestly believe that, because I believe the researchers right now are watching this movement throughout the country on the medical stuff, and the recreational stuff is a whole different topic of discussion, I think, because if I want to get high, I want to get high, right? But if I need my medication because my bones hurt or I'm going through chemotherapy, totally different discussion, correct? So I think we're going to see that research regardless when they change the schedule or not, because the people want to know. And I think professionals in the industry, and you guys are doing a great job by talking about it and promoting it and helping people understand it better.
When I had met Oscar Goodman back in 2002, and in one of our early discussions, he told me, you can't legislate morality. And of course, Oscar was for legalizing everything and including prostitution along the Fremont East and all that. But he was right in the point. People are going to do what they want to do, and that does not extend to violence or anything like that. But as far as something like cannabis, if they're going to use it, and half the people in America have, isn't it better to tax it and regulate it and get public benefit out of it, as opposed to just turning it over to criminals?
Absolutely. And we all know what happened during Prohibition times. We got NASCAR out of that, which I'm pretty happy about that.
But we also had the rise of the mafia.
We did. I'm just joking, but I think a lot of people's minds are changing, and they have to. It's like I said, it's an interesting time we live in. It's so exciting. This coming about, there's so many other things coming about that are going to be in our time period that we didn't see 10, 20 years ago. So the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see great research done, what strains do what, and how to help your migraine the best. And I think people are going to start changing their attitude towards it, honestly.
I've got to say, for someone involved in politics, you're extraordinarily well informed on this subject.
No doubt. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And that's a breath of fresh air.
Well,
really
I think he's much more informed than his competitor that you're running against in the county commission race.
I would say that too.
She's been very prohibitive in our discussion. She did us no favors in legislature last time around, and I was a little bit surprised, actually. I hate to be so political, but it seems like the Democrats are more on our side than the Republicans on this case, and she seemed to be a voice against, and I don't really want to go into why, but I'm just grateful to have your support on this. And
well, you bet. Well, she carried a lot of the Republicans' water for him in the last legislative session, so that's on record. In multiple ways. So it's unfortunate. That's an unfortunate thing. But let's talk about that for a minute, because when the legislature should have handled all of this whole licensing issue, this whole categorizing issue, all of the things that local governments had to deal with. And the city of Las Vegas has been very difficult. And it's funny, when I knew the legislature was going to shove this down to local governments, I told our staff at the city, get over with Clark County, get with the city of of Henderson and North Las Vegas, let's have a blanket set of standards for the dispensaries, for the production, for the cultivation, so it's blanket across the valley. For too long, our governments have lived in silos. And you know what the response was from our city team after weeks of me asking and prodding them? The county says, go pound sand, we're going to do our own. So the county sets their certain standards, we set our standards, and now we're having to change those so it's fair competitively between the city and the county. So fortunately, we have a very good relationship with North Las Vegas as the city of Las Vegas, because that's my biggest border, North Las Vegas. And the city of Henderson, they're doing their own thing because they're next to the county. But nonetheless, I think the legislature shoved it down the throats of local governments purposely instead of dealing with themselves like they should have. I think this should have been handled at the state level. They should have set the parameters. All of this licensing should have gone through the state and not the local governments.
Well, I think I largely agree with you, but I think one of the issues was that the state government did not want to occupy the field and take over local land use and zoning regulations, and that is at least the reason that they gave for tossing so much of it to local governments.
How many times have you seen the legislature in this state hand things down to local governments because they didn't want to deal with it? Too many times, time and time again. Or they'll form a committee or a group of people to, let's study that because we don't want to make the difficult decisions. I'm going to tell you something. You run for office, you want to serve the public, you're elected to make difficult decisions based on what you think is best for your community. And it bothers me when people run for those offices and they don't stand up and do what their jobs are supposed to do.
I absolutely agree, and and not to defend them, but we have a part-time legislature that meets for 120 days every other year, but our local governments are full-time governments and so are more responsible to the people,
absolutely. And I think you guys have seen me, how I've served this city. I'm there every single day. My team is out there in the field, even on weekends and their days off. I mean, and I hate to say that, but we're 24/7, just like the city is.
Yep.
Yes, sir. Do you believe that a more full-time, I've asked our last guest last week about this, and I'll ask you the same thing. Do you believe that the state would be well served or less served by having at least an annual legislative session rather than a biannual, or extending that legislative session? Do you feel like they're put under too much pressure to get all of 2 years of work done in the 120-day session, or do you just think that's nonsense and they could do it and they purposefully just kind of shoo away the things they don't want to under the guise of not having the time?
I think it's a game. I honestly do. I don't think that this state could be served if they met annually. I think what would be better is if the legislature actually gave some functional home rule to cities and counties to allow them to make decisions, so the cities and the counties didn't have to wait every 2 years for the legislature to give them an opportunity to do something. And I'm not talking about taxing authority. I'm not talking about fee authority. We already have that. I'm talking about just functional things that our local governments want to do, and they can't because they're bound by the legislative process. I served 2 years as the president of the Nevada League of Cities, which gave me an opportunity to associate with a lot of the mayors, a lot of the council members throughout the state, certainly the 5 cities in southern Nevada. And we have a lot of similar issues going on, and we're almost handcuffed sometimes when it comes to just functional realities of being local governments and serving our constituencies better.
Let me go back to one thing that you said just a little earlier about more research. We've been hearing a lot about a medical school coming down to Las Vegas, based, a UNR-based medical school that is operating or will be operating out of UNLV, or they're using that as the foundation. And my question is, if we get that medical school, yes, I agree with you that it would be great to turn Las Vegas into a center of research in this area. Is this something that the county commission that you're running for will have any sort of pull in?
I think that the more local leaders who understand where we lack in educational resources in Southern Nevada, I get it, because I've spent a great deal of time with Professor Rob Lang from the Brookings Institute at UNLV. He's certainly gives me an education every time I meet with him, actually. But we need a research facility. We need a research university here in Nevada and in Las Vegas, not Northern Nevada. Southern Nevada. There's 2 million people that live here in the south and 1 million that live in the north, so it's 3 million population. This is the epicenter of economic growth, economic development. Sure, they've got Tesla going on up there, and I know Switch is looking at a new co-location up there as well. But this is where the people are. This is where the tax revenue generation really is, right here in Southern Nevada. Sure. And according to Professor Lang, we've got to have a research university, a medical school, our own. And I think that's significant. I know UNLV wants that. And I think as a county commissioner, we can always be talking about ringing that bell and always trying to push the bar a little farther to make it a reality. So Len Jessup over, the good leadership going on over there right now. But I think all local governments need to be on board on a regional level when it comes to these things. Is it a research university? Is it a medical school? Is it light rail down Maryland Parkway for transportation? Is it a dome stadium, or where does it go? I think all of these are regional issues that everybody needs to be on board with and not be living in their silos, which they do today.
Well, to stop passing the joint for a minute, let me ask you, what else are your core issues as you're running for the county commission?
Well, I got to tell you, the initial core issue is the relationships. The relationships are very strained right now between the county and the municipalities, and that needs to be fixed. I think the county needs to be that umbrella government that looks at the municipalities within its borders and says, how can I help you? Not how can I hurt you, how can I help you? And not be the gorilla in the room. And I think that's what's been going on as of late. I think Mayor Goodman's has been doing a very good job representing the city as a whole. I think that the current county commission lacks in a lot of leadership opportunities. I think the economic opportunities there as well. The city of Las Vegas has got the most robust economic development department, I think, in the country, one of the best. And the county has nothing, and there's so many great opportunities that the county could be looking for just for economic growth and development. Let's use cultivation, for example. Well, let me back up a little bit. The city is actually focused on sectors, and we looked at East Fremont Street years ago and said, what do we want to see on East Fremont? We want to bring downtown back. What are we missing? Well, we did away with the licensing fee for a liquor license for you to have a tavern. So what did that do? A whole bunch of taverns popped up on East Fremont Street. So we focused in on an industry, we brought them down there, we helped them get started, and now it's alive and well in downtown Las Vegas. And that's the heart of our city. The county can do the same thing in focusing on certain businesses, certain industries that we currently don't have, and say, okay, how do we really sweeten the pie here to make these folks want to come to Clark County in Southern Nevada? That's not happening. And that needs to.
And so, of course, we can, as a 501c3 nonprofit, and we cannot make any endorsements. And with that being said, we can see that you are obviously knowledgeable about this issue, and that you are a friend to patients out there.
Obviously.
And so you're running. Early voting has already started, and so it is not too late for people to get out there and make their decision. In the primaries here between you and your opponent, who we all acknowledge has not been a friend to this program. And while I hope none of us are single issue voters, for people who are sick or one of their loved ones is sick, this is an important issue, and we need people in government who can understand and the complexities of this issue. So I urge people to get out there and vote. If you like what you've heard here today, I would suggest you consider that in your voting habits. And
if they want to find out more about you, is there a website they can go to, or
Absolutely.
a Facebook page or something like that?
SteveRoss.Vegas, and everybody should have a .Vegas
domain name.
Absolutely,
yeah.
SteveRoss.Vegas, and you can find me there all day. My cell number's there. Anything you want to know about me, and appreciate you guys having me on today. I hope this helped.
Thanks so much
you
for
for taking
coming on.
your time,
We really
sir.
appreciate your time as well.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Weekend 702 Nevada Cannabis News Hour. Now, here again, the Weekend.
Welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. So we just had Steve Ross in the studio. That was a great little interview there.
Fantastic.
And let's start with some local news. We just had the Patient's Choice
Awards
in town this last weekend. That was a great event. We knocked it out of the park with the soaps and the socks. Made enough money to help probably about 5 or 6 patients at Patient's Choice. So I didn't get a chance to really walk around and see the event because I was at the booth the whole time. But the people that were coming through, very, very good people.
Where was it, and can you tell us a little bit more about what it was?
Well, the Patient's Choice is a cannabis competition. With like the High Times Cannabis Cups, where the growers enter their product, and unlike other, like the Cannabis Cups and that, where they have celebrity judges and all that, and you don't really know who's winning, this was judged by the attendees. If you were in attendance, you could go stand in line to judge the flower or judge the concentrates. So the patrons were the judges. So that's why they call it the Patient's Choice Awards. And this was the second one. It was put on by our good friends at the Clark County Cannabis Club. And it was held at a private residence because that's the way we have to do it.
Sure.
And everybody had to be a patient. And there was quite a good turnout. I'd say there was probably 500, 600 people there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
That many, huh?
Yeah, it was a big big private property. It was only half of the property that they used. That's how big it was.
Okay.
And it was very well attended. Lots of vendors there. A lot of the vendors weren't local. A lot of them were from out of state and stuff.
What about the patients? Do you think that there were any out-of-state patients, or were they all
Oh,
local?
I'm sure there were out-of-state patients. I mean, a majority of our patients here are from California and that. And we did have some people tell me they traveled for it. Reason to come to Vegas.
And
Cannabis
yes,
championship.
it shows how this industry can help the Las Vegas and Clark County economy. And it's small at the start, even 500-600 people for a cannabis-based event in Las Vegas. That's huge. That's pretty good. But compared to conventions or trade shows that come in, it's small, but it's just at the inception. And it can be such a growth industry in the state.
I was just reading an article on my phone maybe 20, 30 minutes before the show started, and it was in the Review Journal Online, and it was all about how a lot of these California companies are starting to take a really hard look. These California cannabis corporations are taking a much harder look at Nevada all of a sudden than they were, let's say, a couple of years ago. After that initial fallout, after the original round of dispensary and cultivation permits were issued in the county, you remember that fateful day where the county where everyone was in there and it was that whole thing. After that, there was kind of a lull, and now you're starting to see the interest pick back up. So when you say, oh, well, there's a lot of California vendors and things like that, I would imagine that some of the more notable California concentrate and edible companies and things like that are going to try to start making their mark here, because you've already seen companies like Moxie and things like that, people from Colorado come in and try to license and brand their stuff here in Nevada, and it's just going to continue to snowball as places reach out for more of those established brand names to pick up on.
I think that part of that is due to the fact that we had this round of licensing applications in 2014, and because of the delay in getting them done, the Division of Health decided not to have that open window in 2015, but everything that I'm seeing so far indicates they are going to open that window this year again. So those out-of-state companies are going to want to take advantage of that, because there's a limited number of licenses that will be issued.
So oh, wow. Well, I guess we'll hopefully be breaking that story when it develops also, and we'll be keeping an eye on that.
As soon as it does.
Yeah. And in other local news, the patient program. I just recently received some disturbing news. I called about my packet because I expire in July.
But you mean the state medical marijuana like if you're applying for a packet? Because I
Yeah.
was thinking we were talking about our patient program.
Yeah, our patient program.
No, I mean our weekend patient program. My fault.
No, the state
confused.
program.
Okay.
So I'm due to renew in July
Okay.
19th. It's been my renewal date forever. I called about my packet because I wanted to help another patient who has some anxiety. I wanted to go to the DMV with her and get everything done at the same time. They informed me when I called them that, yes, that's fine. I've already sent my packet. I should be receiving it. But the day they receive it back becomes my new expiration date. So I received my packet last week. Now, normally, I'm always at the doctor's helping with our weekend patient program. So I usually have my packet filled out and ready to go within a week, no problem, because I see the doctors every week anyway. So it's not out of my way to go. So I would have already sent that back. And not knowing this, I would have already sent that back, and I would have lost 6 weeks off of my packet from last year.
And this
That
is
you paid
not
for.
something new.
It is. They just started doing this.
When we were holding the cannabis symposiums back in 2014, I remember somebody coming up to me and talking about this exact issue, that they got their card back and they were shorted about a month and a half, a month and 3 weeks from the full year. And if you go to a dispensary and you were shorted an eighth or two off of your ounce, you'd be pretty mad.
Of course.
But they're letting the patients so far have been letting the state get away with this.
Well, that was on the new applications then, because it was taking they started your new renewal date from when they received it, but it'd be 6 or 7 weeks until you actually got your card and used it to purchase. Well, see, now they fixed that. They've gone into a new computer program, which now they're getting those out in 9 days to 2 weeks on the new patients.
Yeah,
Okay?
I've talked
But
to a couple
now,
of patients that
because
you
of that-
helped. It's
because of that program, this is what they say. They said it's because of that program that the renewal date changes when you get the packet. So now, instead of new patients losing 6 weeks on the beginning of their first application, everybody who renews is going to lose time on the back end of their application.
Right. so
Probably
they're-
every year henceforth.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
what,
for
over the
every
course of
year.
8 or 9 years, the
Unless they
state
get it fixed.
you'll roll it back an entire year, and they'll be making more money off the licensing. Is that what this is about?
Ultimately, well, I don't think it's about that. I think it's just inefficiencies in the state process, and they need to get this programming error corrected.
It almost seems malicious in nature. I don't want to say it that
I
way,
would wanna-
but
I
it's
would wanna
just, they're just,
characterize-
it's just always something, it seems like.
I found from personal experience that when you characterize the government as malicious, they prove you right. So, so I don't want to do that.
Fair enough.
You know, but I think this is one of those things that we can and our supporters are going to have to get with the Division of Health and force these changes. It's something that we can has been doing since the start of this nonprofit, going out there, speaking truth to power, getting in front of legislators or local government officials and the division as well. So no, I don't think there's any maliciousness here. I think it's just, you know, typical inefficiencies.
Just honest
that
mistakes
happen.
that are rolling down upon the backs of the patients.
I'd prefer to look at it that way.
Okay.
But it's something that we all need to be aware of. And so if our listeners, as patients, get their license back and they're shorted 4 weeks or 6 weeks, they ought to call up and complain. And not that individual call is going to get things done immediately, but the weight of enough calls. If we can mobilize our various members and followers, then we're going to get this change accomplished for the betterment of all patients in the state.
Yeah, and it was the phone calls that prompted them to tell me that, because they've already been receiving those phone calls when people get their new card in the mail. They're like, wait, my expiration date is wrong, and so they call and say, what the heck happened? You know?
You had
Sure.
a really terrific idea, Kurt, when we were having private discussion some days ago, in that after the first year, your expiration date should be tied to your birthday, just like your driver's license is. So it makes it easy for everybody. You don't have to figure, you know, it's not, what's my anniversary date? I don't remember. And if it's tied to your birthday, especially if you're going down to the DMV every 4 years and getting your license, well, why not combine this with that? So I think that's another direction that we could hopefully convince the state to take a look at.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy with the date I've had forever. It's real easy to remember. You know, it actually falls right in line with our anniversary date for weekend, so it makes it real easy. We're, you know, July 20th is our anniversary mark, and July 19th is when I got my card. So I got my card and became a weekend member the very next day.
There you go. There you go. So also in the state of Nevada, we see that the Nevada Supreme Court is going to be reviewing a proposed comment to be added to the state rules of professional conduct for lawyers. Wow, professional conduct for lawyers? That's amazing. Relating to the state's medical marijuana laws. And they'll be holding this at 1 p.m. on July 7th here in Las Vegas. And it'll be video conferenced up to the Nevada Supreme Court in Carson City. And what they're doing is they want to have comment from attorneys and the public regarding the proposed comment and whether additional changes to the state rules are required. And what happened was in 2014, the Supreme Court added a comment to the rules that allowing Nevada attorneys to counsel clients regarding medical marijuana decisions. And I'm not talking about criminal cases here with defendants. I'm talking about people who were running MMEs or becoming licensees. The new comment seeks to inform attorneys that federal law prohibits the sale, use, or possession of marijuana, as if someone could pass the bar without knowing that, you know, and that engaging in such behavior, even where allowed by state law, could result in prosecution and the threat of attorney misconduct. So what the Supreme Court is looking to do is make it clear to attorneys that if they're taking MMEs on as clients, that they could be sanctioned by the courts, either on a state or federal level, for providing counsel to these people. And it's just another way that if this change does get written into their rules, it just shows another way that the bureaucracy can throw sand into the gears and slow things down. You know, if this is a state legal business and you've got attorneys acting in a lawful manner in the state, then why should the state start threatening them with sanctions?
Well, yeah, and another thing, attorneys are licensed by the state, not by the federal government. So what does anything with the federal government have to
It's
do
like
with
Mike
it?
said, it's just a
They're-
way for them to throw sand in the gears. It's a way for them to slow down the process a little bit, because people in certain places, I feel like, don't want this program to exist, and they're going to do what they can to slow it down. I mean, you can say, oh, well, we just want to make sure it's done right, or this, that, and the other, but really, there haven't been many, if any, negative incidents to point to with the legal MME licensed dispensaries. So this is just, I don't know, I don't want to say fabricated, but proactive in nature purely, and I just don't know. I don't know what the game plan is. Are they afraid the state's going to get sued by the federal government or something?
No, I don't think they're afraid of that at all. I think it just becomes a case where there are some people in there who just think that they don't believe the anecdotal evidence from lots of people's research. They don't believe the actual research that's been done in other countries. They're still looking at this as a social evil and what they can do to delay it. I remember just a couple of months ago, I was at a hearing of the Interim Legislative Council, and Nevada Supreme Court Justice Hardesty was presiding over this, and he was asking the people at the Division of Health whether there had been complaints from any people in the state that the edibles were causing them to hallucinate. And so, to me, that showed that he doesn't really have a good grasp on what this medicine does. And so you have people like that who are doing everything they can to slow down the wheels of progress.
They're the people who believe
So
in...
what is, this is kind of out of the hands of the average citizen, isn't it? This is kind of a fight between the legal minds of the powers that be.
Most likely. I don't think they're going to pay a whole lot of attention to what the citizens say unless we get up there en masse and have 50 people show up and each person take 3 minutes, and then we delay them by 3 hours. Then they might start to listen. So I wanted to look at one other thing here before we go to break. There's an international study that says recreational marijuana prohibition violates human rights, and this comes from Duke London, written by at marijuana.com. And he's on Monday, May 30th. Legal scholars from Rabud University in the Netherlands released the International Law and Cannabis 2 study. Their findings from a lengthy study on how certain human rights obligations are affected by widespread cannabis legislation. And they're arguing that this prohibition just violates the most basic of human rights. And we actually see in Mexico just a few months ago, their Supreme Court came out with this very decision, and it has decriminalized personal use of drugs because they feel that the government does not have the authority to go in there and micromanage people's lives that way. And what they're saying, the primary conditions set in this study for the regulation and trade of recreational cannabis are there are 5 points. The first is relevant human rights-based interests, where they conclude that the regulation of recreational marijuana would be considered a positive obligation for human rights based on our right to health and life. Our right to not be subjected to inhumane treatment, and our right to privacy. And that inhumane treatment is imprisoning people. And even if you put people in a nice prison, which I have yet to see, it's inhumane to put them in prison for treating themselves medically, or just for doing something to make them feel good, feel better in life, which, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And the second point is that jump in on any of these.
No, it's just like we've made these arguments over and over. It's just the amount of incarcerated people for these nonviolent crimes in this country is just completely outrageous. I look at when I was a little kid, I remember people used to say this is the freest country in the world, and people would be proud of it and really mean it. And when you say that today, just people kind of laugh. They're like, yeah, sure.
Sure it
freest
is.
country in the world. It's like a joke, and it's so sad how quickly that social perception has just devolved in society, and people are so statist. They're just like, if the government says it's bad, it's bad. We hate the dope. We hate the dopers. The law is the law. Follow the law because it's the law. And that's their justification, is follow the law because it's the law.
And yet at the same time, we have historically low approval ratings in Congress, and we have an election this year where on the Republican side, you've got one of the most anti-politicians ever, and on the Democratic side, you've got a far left progressive Democratic socialist who has been capturing the youth vote with over 80%.
Oh, yeah.
And so
the Bernie or bust people, the Democrats are scared about that because they feel like those people aren't going to show up. And that's a whole nother issue.
the odds are they won't, because
That's
younger voters
crazy.
don't tend to vote as much. But the point there being, you're saying on the one hand, people listen to this, government prohibition hardline. At the same time, most of them don't trust the government with anything else. So why do they believe this?
I don't know.
Well, I think the younger voters are coming out because they are anti-establishment, and they're just fed up with it. I mean, Bernie's pulling numbers that rock bands would love to pull. He's filling stadiums that bands can't fill.
He filled 60,000 seats the other day.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be the Democratic nominee. It's just that simple at this point.
They had that decided before he even got into the race.
Yes, I certainly think so. But back to this human rights study, they say that the second point is that the claim of a more effective human rights protection must be substantiated, and says that each country is different, and their study should not be interpreted as a blanket solution, but rather a guide to reform. And legal scholars suggest that each country participate in research and pilot programs to determine if the legalization of recreational cannabis rather than prohibition would protect its citizens' rights or harm them. And I've got another story here that shows from 2002 to 2013 that teen marijuana use has dropped by 10%. And that's showing that as we regulate this, as more legitimate markets come online, that it is not the forbidden fruit that it was previously.
And this is in the face of recreational, this is in the face of more access, in the face of endless cannabis-related products coming in the market, between edibles and the rise of concentrates, dabs, and things like that, vaporizer pens. Like, the game has changed so much, and there is so much more variety for people out there, and yet still these teen use rates fall.
Yes, absolutely. And, a third point in this is national democratic support and decision making, which basically says that a country should not ignore the will of its people. And here in the United States, recent polls are showing that a majority of 54% of Americans favor legalization, taxation, regulation across the board. And so this is saying it is a violation of human rights for governments to enact a tyranny of the minority and force these prohibitions on their citizens, who largely are looking to liberalize these laws.
And
we can come back to this, but we probably need a break.
it's time for our second break. Make sure you check out our sponsors. These are the people that help make our show happen, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. So,
We were talking about this human rights study that's come out, and 5 points, and we'll just touch on these last couple quickly before we get into other things. And what they're saying is that if countries are dissimilar and have different degrees of cannabis laws, that what they should do is enact a complete closed system within a country. So you have cultivation, you have productions, you have your extractions, you have your distribution and retail, all within the country. So that way, if the United States doesn't want to let Mexican pot across the border because Texas or other states still are opposed to it, then that's fine. But each country should be allowed its sovereignty to develop its own cannabis laws rather than relying on the UN Single Convention on Narcotics, which was passed in 1961, which is seriously out of date, and whose head is a Russian politician who has been deadly against this and has blocked any sort of any sort of change.
That guy went with the military into Siberia, and they were trying to eradicate all the wild cannabis, and spent like billions of rubles trying to go for it, and ended up just giving it up because it's everywhere. They couldn't, they couldn't do it, and it's just one of those things.
And we do the same thing here. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars annually in the Midwest having police teams rip up ditchweed on the side of the road. Weed that was originally, those seeds came from the government during the Hemp for Victory campaign in World War II, when we needed hemp after we lost the Philippines. And this stuff just seeded out, went wild, and so we are wasting all of this money and law enforcement resources on eradicating something. It won't even get anybody high to begin with.
It's just hemp.
Yeah, it's just hemp. And the fifth point, and I think that this is an important one, the obligatory policy of discouragement, and meaning that countries who do not allow recreational use, which is everybody but I guess the Netherlands, Portugal, and Uruguay, and now Mexico on a very small personal level, that these countries should not officially be lying to their people and putting this propaganda. For 40 plus years, we've had a war on drugs fostered by a DEA, which has now grown to 11,000 people strong. It's a shadow State Department, and they have untold amounts of money. And there's an office in the presidential administration called the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And by their very mandate, the rules under which that agency operates, they are not allowed to say anything positive about reform or legalization or diminution of penalties or anything like that. They're allowed to lie when necessary. And when necessary is any time they don't agree with something somebody is saying. It's just crazy. So there's a very interesting study, and I think it's very valid for a lot of people. And once again, that came from the site marijuana.com, and you can just go up and it's on their front page today, and probably will.
Well, so what does this mean? They say the world court's in the Netherlands, right? So does this have any repercussions through that? I mean, I can't imagine marijuana-related case going to the world court, but does it have any effect on that whatsoever? Does this tie into anything?
It's a university study, so it's not going to be something that is going to carry legal weight. It's more of an informative and educational point to get this discussion moving forward and to hopefully get action from that. But what they're one of the things that they're talking about here is that you have governments that are divided within themselves, and I just mentioned the DEA, and the DEA has been using this single convention from 1961 for decades now to prevent research into cannabis, and they maintain this one farm at the University of Mississippi down in Biloxi, where they have this this terrible low quality weed being produced.
So I've heard.
And I've met one of the people who's still on the federal medical marijuana program, and she says that they send her 300 grams every month, and she doesn't use it, or she uses it for cooking because it is so terrible. And the DEA has been saying that due to this UN treaty that we cannot have more than one source of marijuana being grown in the country for study. But just in the past couple of months, the United States State Department said that the DEA is wrong on this, and that yes, we certainly can multiply source cannabis for research, and that the DEA has just been blowing smoke up everybody's butt for all these
seizing
years.
A lot of power for itself over the years, as started as a very small government entity and has grown by leaps and bounds without by its own mandate. They take it for themselves as they perceive the problems growing.
And I'm not going to get on another rant about the DEA, because I found that doing that in the past is one of the surest ways to get yourself raided. So I'll limit my criticism here, but wow, we have to be more involved in the country that we're living in and involved in the direction that it's going. And that means registering, that means going out to vote. And a lot of people find that to be an obligation, but we here over the past few years have learned that going before the legislature, going before local commissions, and speaking to politicians directly is the only thing that's going to change their minds and move it forward. And so, as I've often said, people should really be involved in this issue because the arrest you prevent may be your own.
Absolutely.
Well, we got a little bit of time left. We were talking about some studies last week. A study came out from AAA saying that the legal limits for driving on pot are not backed by science.
How long have we been banging that drum?
Yeah,
oh
exactly.
my God.
Right.
Gee, for the last 3 legislative sessions, we've been asking for them to raise the de facto nanogram limit.
Remove it. We're one of only 6 states that has a nanogram limit. The other 44 states out there don't have a limit.
And
The
it's
argument
a
against-
per se limit. It means if they find it in your system, they don't care whether you smoked 4 minutes ago or 4 weeks ago. If they find it in your system, you're de facto guilty.
Yeah, your automatic DUI. The argument against that, I was talking to one of the female Republican senators last legislative session when me and Jen were up in Carson trying to kind of chew through this. Some assembly bill was proposed that got some language slipped in that we were going to try to take advantage of. I forgot which one, but the long and the short of it, the female senator basically said that she didn't have enough confidence, or we shouldn't have, that she didn't put that, she said we probably should not put all of that faith into the individual police officer's hands, which is where the power would then reside to determine intoxication. It would be their perception of whether you are or you aren't. If the de facto limits were taken away and there's nothing on paper to back you up. And she's like, look, a lot of these younger police officers can't even tell the difference between someone who's having a diabetic episode and someone who's drunk.
They tase people having diabetic
So
episodes.
do you
It's
really
incredible.
want your freedom at their hands? How do you think they'll treat you? And and my thought was, well, hell, they're going to throw you under the bus every time they get a chance to, was my automatic thought. So how do we work through that? Even if we got them all the levels removed, how would we chew through that problem?
There are several points there. And one of them is that under Nevada law, by getting a driver's license, you are granting the police the ability to draw your blood anytime that they think forcibly draw your blood anytime they think you're intoxicated, and that is a trade-off you make for riding on Nevada roads. So even if whether the police think you're intoxicated or not, in this scenario, they could draw blood from you, and if it comes back and you're over that 2 nanogram limit, you're hit with a DUI. Yet the other point of that you made is giving the officer too much power and field sobriety tests. I've been advised by multiple lawyers that, well, I don't drink and drive. That's number one. But if you get pulled over and the officer wants to conduct a field sobriety test, stand up for your rights and say no, because as soon as you agree to that sobriety test, you have failed it, because it is subjective and the officer can do whatever or say whatever, and
as they so
say
often
that
do.
He says, he thinks you're under the influence and that you're jammed up there. And so anytime somebody's pulled over, you should just assert your rights there and say no. And he may say, well, I'm going to go draw blood. And then you have to make the decision yourself how to proceed forth. But you're right, giving the individual officer that kind of control is problematic, but so is a law that doesn't account for the fact that medical patients not only are going to have a much higher nanogram level in their system, but that they tolerate the medication.
Absolutely. I heard someone say it a long time ago. I forgot who was talking to me about this, but they made an argument. They said, look, a fresh cannabis user will, of course, be more intoxicated than an experienced one. Similar to, this is a very extreme level, but if you've ever done tobacco dip, and you take it for the first time, it gets you really high. The nicotine is almost overwhelming, almost to the point to where people throw up. If you were to jump in a car right at that exact moment, you probably wouldn't be in such a good place. Should we test people for de facto nicotine levels? Of course not, because it breaks into your system so quick that it's socially accepted. Now, I'm not saying it's the same for weed, because it isn't. The break-in time is longer, but there is a break-in time, and the tolerance goes up rather quickly.
And and you mentioned an interesting point, because with tobacco, back in the 1600s, when tobacco was first being brought from the New World back to the European colonies, there are writings from religious leaders extolling against the use of tobacco because it was getting people intoxicated, and that the effect was so strong on these people that they felt that it had to be banned. And over years, over centuries now, you've got tobacco use which is normalized, and yes, it kills people, but it doesn't get them as high. And I don't smoke cigarettes, but I hear people who do get a little jolt.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're running out of time, so be sure check us out. We'll be at First Friday tomorrow, June 3rd. Las Vegas Hemp Fest on Saturday all day. Come out, check out our booth. Come out, get your socks and your soaps. And besides that, we have Elevate Magazine next Thursday, so we'll cover that a little more on the next show. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.